Bueno, amigos de Almuerzo de Negocios, y aquí estamos con otra interesantísima entrevista en este FOA Impacta, y tenemos el placer de entrevistar a Arielle Garcia, quien acaba de bajar del escenario y estuvo conversando con la audiencia sobre el uso responsable de los datos. Y oigan qué dato tan interesante para nosotros que nos gusta tanto la pelota. Ella es Salón de la Fama de la Publicidad por la AAF. También es especialista en publicidad tecnológica, así que de verdad, it's a pleasure for us, Arielle, to have you here. And I was commenting to the audience that you are a Hall of Fame in advertising. And you know, a Hall of Fame in any aspect is very important and it's a privilege and honor. Welcome to Almuerzo de Negocios. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I was watching and listening to your presentation, and it was very interesting because you were talking about some responsibility to the purpose that the companies have to have in order to impact the business right now and the advertising business. And I was wondering, and to reflect with you about the ethics in business, and especially with the power that the digital platforms, social media has right now.
Yes.
And how you can make a balance between the power of this social media and the ethics that you have to have. Because if you don't use it the right way, you can make harm to the business.
So that's such a great question. So, you know, one of the things that I think advertisers have forgotten that they have a ton of power.
Yes.
Advertisers have forgotten that they're the ones that have made the platforms rich, right? So there's a concept that when I was in law school, it's a test for causation. So like to test if something that someone did was the reason that someone else got hurt. It's called the but-for test. So but for this, that wouldn't have happened.
Yes.
But for advertising, but for advertiser investment, those platforms would not have the power that they have. Which means if advertisers start demanding things, if they start taking a vested interest, and transparency is my favorite one because without that, everything else is kind of useless, because how can you tell? How can you know, right? So
and you lose your reputation.
Yes.
If you don't use your transparency and somebody realize that you are lying, you lose everything.
Yeah, like so today, one of the things that I think is it's astounding is that we're in this world where brands are paying for bad, unethically collected data to reach often fake people, bots, on unbrand safe websites. and they're worried about pushing back on the platform so that they don't lose effectiveness. They're worried about like not using the latest shiny product that the platforms are pushing. You know, I was talking about Performance Max because they're worried about campaign effectiveness. And like, stop and think, like along the way, you have to start taking a vested interest in what you're funding and where your dollars are going. So that's how you balance both. Like I'd say that pushing for transparency and not investing. So let's say you're an advertiser, you decide you're only going to let your agency buy on platforms or using products where you can get full placement reporting. That's a big step.
Yes.
It also helps you like snuff out any fraud or brand safety issues that you're seeing. It makes it infinitely easier to do that. And it's good practice. You could do the same with data ethics principles. So like if you have your own principles, for example, you're going to start including in your contract that you, or in your RFIs, that you're not going to work with companies that sell data to the government. Like, there are creative ways to do this. There are a million different ways to do this. And I don't know that it's necessarily about balance as much as it is starting somewhere. So my recommendation is start with demanding transparency. It makes sense. It's your money. You have the right to demand transparency.
Excellent. You know that maybe 15 years ago, we have a global market in advertising. But now, the world, political and economically speaking, is very convulsive. You have like a fragmented world. And for example, you have China have some rules,
Yes.
as Occident has all other rule West, and you have a war over here, a war over
Yeah.
there, and so many different laws and ways of doing things. And how you, as a global brand, have to make products especially for every market. It's a big it's a big problem.
There's a balance there, right? And that's why I like to focus on having a responsible advertising approach or an ethical advertising approach versus getting hung up on the details as a first step. Because, you know, I say that responsibility is the capital that gives business the license to innovate. It's the capital that gives iconic brands the license to grow. If you're designing your standards to meet a higher bar, you're skating ahead of a lot of what's going on in any pocket of the world, right? So it's good insulation. So one of the things that has been frustrating me with like the cookieless dialogue is all of the identity solutions that come out. Half of them are based on like some replacement for cookies, like another identifier. And I'm like, okay, if you're not fixing the transparency and choice part, the reason we all got into this mess, like if you're going to use IP address, unless people have transparency and choice over that, you're going to end up in the same place.
Yes.
So a good way to stay ahead of all of that is by having your own standards that align with consumer expectation. Because if you think about it, people like to think about regulation as driving the discourse. Regulations in most countries, this is not the same everywhere, but like consumer expectation is what starts the regulation, not the other way around.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is there are some nuances in, like, especially in privacy law. You need to have a tech infrastructure to deal with that. Like, you need to have a consent management platform where you can set a global policy, but you can also easily like change the experience to match different jurisdictions. There are technical solutions. So I'd say, like, for advertisers, it's also, if they haven't already, investing in solutions that help them stay nimble when there are these nuances and changes.
Excellent. We know that so many companies are collecting our data.
Yes.
And they are using in order to be more effective in the way that they advertise us.
Yes.
Or they reach us. But you were talking about, and this is one of your expertise, the responsible use of data.
Yes.
How you can be responsible when the consumer is not worried about their data? You know, everybody's saying, okay, yes, when they are getting up of some social media. They are not worried about it. And then the governments are already worried, and that's why Meta and Google and everybody is getting sued by the government of the United States. It's a recent news. How the governments are covering the consumer for something that they don't care about it.
There's so much to unpack there, but the thing I would say is don't be fooled by looking at people's action and what they'll accept as an indication that they're comfortable with it. Transparency is key, right?
Okay.
So when I interact with a brand, I may expect, and I consent, I say yes, right? I may expect that they're going to use my information.
Okay.
I don't necessarily expect that the entire ad tech ecosystem is going to end up trading on my data. That is not right. And like, and why would consumers expect that? So some of this is again, they're not being asked a fair question. They're not really, and people are concerned about things like surveillance. People are concerned about misinformation. People are concerned. So it depends on how you phrase the question.
And if you put cybersecurity in the table, it's a mess.
That's what's crazy, right? Like, we're also talking about there was a report by the Navy, the intelligence agencies talking about ad tech as posing a national security threat, right? So these things are not evident when people consent to things. They don't know everything that they're trading off. They do know that they're concerned about those things, but the way that those surveys and things like that are drafted don't necessarily make sense. So I would say don't be fooled by that, because consent in the absence of transparency isn't really meaningful. The other thing is, how exactly does someone opt out of any of this? Like, they have to not use a phone, not use their credit card, their transaction data is being sold to data brokers, being sold to governments, being sold to whoever wants it, right? Like, they're going to stop using credit cards, stop using their phone, they're going to stop browsing. It's not possible, and part of that is with big tech, especially living on all sides of the equation. You're going to stop using your map app, you're going to it's not that people are not being asked a fair question, so they can't really, you can't take their behavior. The coercion is also not an indication of comfort.
You are forced to.
Yeah.
Well, Arielle, thank you very much for the time. I know that you're probably a little bit tired because you already go down from the stage. Thank you for your time for our show, and have a nice stay here in Santo Domingo.
Thank you so much.